With very few games remaining on the season, I decided to take a look at a couple teams that honestly just straight up disappointed me. As in, 2 teams that I saw finishing within the top 3 in their divisions and making a postseason entry. So what we're going to do is go through both of these teams and try and figure out, per se, what went wrong and why they've struggled at times to be competitive. And with that, here are 2 NHL teams that have had trash seasons. So what I'm going to do is just kind of give the big picture first, and then we'll kind of go into more statistical details and analysis from there. So earlier on in the season in Columbus, obviously the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade happened, and then it was largely a 1-for-1. They got Jack Roslovic, and there's some picks involved, but largely a 1-for-1. And Laine came in. Okay, so you're trading in a guy that is fitting in your system. He's a two-way forward. He can score, and he can also play a 200-foot game. And you're trading him for a guy that can score. He's really good at scoring, but he does not play a 200-foot game. He honestly, if you look at his stats, he was kind of sort of playing both ends of the ice in Winnipeg to an extent. Now, obviously, Laine, you don't look at Laine and think he's, going to win the Selke or anything, respectively, but you look at him and you say, okay, maybe he wasn't a complete one-dimensional player in Winnipeg. For whatever reason, I'm not sure, but you can look at the stats right here, the takeaways giveaway ratio. I mean, it speaks for itself. I don't really need to say anything. I'll show it. It's just, yeah, it's atrocious, unfortunately, to look at. And I think this was one of the biggest issues on the season, probably, and probably the worst, as I honestly said whenever this happened, like the worst place that Laine could go because of the system, and it just does not, the coaching and everything, it just does not benefit him as a player at all. So, obviously, Torts is going to leave, so we'll see if that changes. As of when I'm making this video, Laine is on the 3rd line, which is, something that I'm sure he does not like, and, the team, well, they're not benefiting from having him there if he's playing there on the 3rd line. Not really, in my opinion. I don't see him as a bottom 6. Anyways, so getting back into the Torts issue, I mean, I think for him, his message is worn off, and it did a long time ago with the Jackets, and I think that despite a lot of the players like Atkinson and some vets that really do like Torts, I think there's been internal discourse within the team, and I think it's obvious, it's evident when things aren't gelling in the room, it shows on the ice. We saw, multiple benchings with Laine. It's not really a good look, probably, for the organization. So, obviously, Torts is parting ways. So we'll see who they bring in, but I'm sure they'll probably want to bring in someone that is, able to cater maybe to a superstar type of player more. Anyways, and then that takes us on to Max Domi, who was another, I think, contributing issue to this season. They were looking at Max Domi, and for some reason he's really been looked at to be a center, and I'm not exactly entirely sure. I just think he plays way better on wing, and I think a lot of people can kind of agree on that. He's kind of flip-flopped over the years, especially in Montreal. I think they had an issue kind of where to put him. If you look at his stats, he's been largely inconsistent over the season, and they were looking at him to kind of make up for Pierre-Luc Dubois, and kind of, in their sense, you're getting Laine, but you've also got Max Domi, who can possibly slot in on that role. So looking at that, smaller guy, and also probably really belongs on wing. But I will say he has had 3 points in his past 5 games, including an ISO goal against Detroit, which is awesome. But all of these issues with Domi as well kind of, compiled into, it's hurting the Jackets, and it's making their issue of just scoring worse, because that's really just their issue. And also tying in, we'll get into a little stats here on defense. So if you look at their PK from last year, it was 87%. Okay. And then versus this year, it was 79. And, you may look at that and it may not look like a lot on the surface, but honestly, for a team that plays defense, that's literally how they were winning games last season, sort of like the Islanders. This is what wins you games, is keeping the puck out of your end, keeping it, forcing them to play the perimeter, blocking shots. And when these things aren't happening on all 4 lines all the time, then this team struggles. And we saw it. I mean, because if you can't score, you've got to make up for it somehow. And if these things aren't happening, you're not going to be winning games, unfortunately. So The goals are basically the same from last season as far as like goals for. The low scoring was continuing, but the thing that stands out here, at least, as far as from a league perspective, this season and last season comparatively, the goals against average for both this season and last season, you can tell there's a big difference. So this season, goals against was 3.29 per game on average. The season before, it was 2.61. So that was literally fourth least in the league. So it's telling you that last season, things were clicking. I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen. You've obviously got a lot of internal issues to fix, but another thing too, going back, a little bit of backtracking, but I wanted to include that if you look at the defensemen as well, especially I looked at Seth Jones and just the defensemen in general. I mean, obviously, like with these goals going in, the plus and minus stats are going to be different, but if you just look at his stats, it's very obvious that he was having an off year as far as, his defensive game. And unfortunately, it cultivated and it kind of added to their issues. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of, what they do, where they go from here, because, I just got to say, Kekalainen has got his work cut out for him. So, second team I wanted to talk about, Philly. I think they're a little bit of a harder team to peg, right? I think they have the same issue here. Obviously, they did of just keeping the puck out of the net, and I mean, as simple as that sounds, it's really not. But there's a lot more contributing to the fact, as they've had the worst goals against average they currently do in the league. So, not a lot of changes to the team like Columbus. They lost Niskanen. They had some smaller additions, but no real blockbuster trades or high-tier additions. Definitely a lot of responsibility, I think. Looking at the big picture, I mean, obviously it does fall on Carter Hart. Unfortunately, he recorded the worst numbers league-wide out of all goalies. This is goals against average and save percentage, who have played 15 or more games with a .877 save percentage and a 3.67 goals against average. So, looking at that, comparing it from to last season, very, very uncharacteristic-like for Carter Hart. And, you think about, all the games he's had to play. He's a younger goalie, not getting the time and the rest off and being that number one guy. I mean, maybe it was a little too soon and too much responsibility put on his shoulders, but regardless, I think another contributor for sure. I mean, if you look at their defensive core, I think it obviously isn't a good look when you do have, I mean, unfortunately, like your top guy, one of your top guys, and Ivan Provorov, for instance, looking at his giveaway takeaways, he has 4 takeaways and 54 giveaways. So that tells you that, yeah, your goalie may be having issues, but I mean, when you have a guy, he's on the top D pairing. Unfortunately, having these turnovers like this, I mean, it's definitely not going to help. Now, he's contributed, if you look at it points-wise, yes, he's blocked some shots, but if you're trying to make things easier on your goalie, this does not help. So, Flyers do have some two-way forwards like Giroux up front. He's good at the two-way game and the face-offs. He's always great at that. But still, this had to just make things worse for Hart, I'm sure, when he was in. Obviously, he's out of the lineup now. But anyways, looking at the stats, they finished 6th in the league in points last year. Now they are not, unfortunately, in the top 6 at all. Now their PK was a lot better last season. If you look at it, 81.2 versus, this season now they're the second worst with a 72.7. So that obviously tells you, okay, they were decent at the penalty kill at the defensive side of the game, and now they're just really struggling. Goals against average, I mean, wasn't great as well. Worse in the league with 3.55, and then last year, looking at that, it was only 2.77, so close to being almost a full goal per game. It's dangerously close, so that's just, wow. That says something. And then if you look at the goals for as well, the 3.29 from last year, and now the 2.84, so the scoring has been down. So obviously, like, when you have a problem keeping the puck out of your own net, when you aren't scoring to make up for it, as we've seen with, I know Pittsburgh has been notorious for that. Edmonton has been notorious for that, but they stay competitive because they can score when they need to. They don't have these problems. So obviously not the worst at scoring in the league, but it's not compensating for this discrepancy. So Very, very off season. I would say that Philly, for me personally, I mean, they were the team that probably slid the most, like more than I suspected they would have, more than Columbus, Dallas, Vancouver, Calgary, these teams that I would have expected to be better. Philly has just genuinely disappointed me. Like, I would have not expected this, but I mean, obviously, like, you just can't predict this team hardly at all. They're just really difficult to peg and to kind of know what's going on. So definitely going to be interesting in the offseason, seeing what they do, but I don't think Hart's going anywhere. Personally, I think it was just an off year, and hopefully, he'll come back and be ready to go. But I hope you enjoyed this. Giving a shout out there to Evan Berger, makes all my tunes. Check out his channel. He does some great work for me, making those beats, so definitely subscribe to him as well.